And welcome everybody to the 2026 Virtual Residency Workshop. This is the introductory and intermediate workshop. This talk is the overview of the workshop. It's Monday, June 22nd, 2026. Uh, and it's the top of the day, and we're going to dive right in. My name's Henry Neiman. You can see all my information there. Uh, and we'll get right into it. So, real quick, logistics. You can go to the web page for the materials. There for every session, there is a Google Doc, and there's a link for each of the sessions on the web page to the Google Docs folder, and then you just double click on the Google Doc specific to the session you're looking at. There's also an email address. You can always send email directly to me, but you can send an email to virtualresidency2026 at gmail.com, and that auto forwards to me. We're using Zoom for video conferencing. Please mute yourself and please turn off your camera, except when you're talking, for example, to ask questions or what have you. We will be posting the slides. I am trying to get the slides in advance, but I can't guarantee that for every session. Bearing in mind that the majority of sessions, I think about two-thirds of the sessions, are panels. And I think in most of those cases, most of the panels, there will not be slides. Okay. In order to use the Zoom, you do have to have a Zoom account. This is a thing that OU enforces for faculty accounts like mine, but it's free. You can just go to the Zoom website and then either give us your full name or your first name and your institution so that I can map that for tracking purposes to report back to the NSF about how swell we are, because we like that. And also, we have seen problems in the past where people have used an older version of Zoom and it doesn't work out so well. So please do use the most recent stable version of Zoom. I have sent you the URL. I think everybody here has gotten the email this morning, and I will be sending that email for every session. So you'll get used to receiving that. So you'll always have the Zoom URL convenient. If you're running it on Android or iOS, you do have to download the Zoom app. It's free. And again, make sure, excuse me, that you have the relevant information. Again, please mute yourself and please turn off your camera. We have people who are like doing it from home and maybe don't have great bandwidth, and so having a lot of video traffic is probably not a good plan. If you can't do the Zoom app, either on your laptop or desktop PC or on a handheld like a phone or tablet, you can always dial in for audio only and then follow along with the slides. It is not a toll-free number. It's a toll number, but I think for most of us, most of the time, even long distance, we're not actually paying by the minute or by the call. So don't worry too much about that. There is actually an international option if you're outside the US. Again, these are not toll-free numbers, but many countries, though by no means all, many countries do have phone numbers that you can call within the country. So again, it's not technically toll-free, but camera off, microphone muted. I already said that. All right, so quick outline of what we're going to cover in this session. So this is the overview session to get introduced to the virtual residency program and the workshop. So this is an experiment. It's an experiment. This is the 12th time we've run the experiment, not including some related activities, but so we'll kind of see how it goes. We'll talk about what CI facilitators are, cyber infrastructure facilitators. We'll talk about the background of the virtual residency program and the campus cyber infrastructure programs, why we can't just use enterprise IT training for cyber infrastructure facilitators, and then we'll dive into the virtual residency itself and this year's workshop. And we'll talk a bit about the Certified Cyber Infrastructure Facilitator Training and Development, or CIFTD program. Okay, so again, it's an experiment. You are the 12th cohort of this national program. I'll give you some history to give you a little context about that. But this is effectively a new way to develop the cyber infrastructure workforce. And it's up to you to make it a success. So ask questions. I love being interrupted. Some of the speakers and panels, they will say, hold your questions to the end. Others will say, interrupt. If they don't say, hold your questions to the end, I think you can probably feel free to interrupt them. And the only dumb questions are the questions that you didn't ask. So volunteer your point of view, your experiences, your ideas, whatever you may have. Everybody's point of view helps. And you're in charge, not us. And I mean that in a very literal sense. So the very first time we did this back in 2015, um, we at primarily at OU with some collaborators at other institutions put together the program. And in particular, the collaborators at other institutions put together individual sessions. But we developed the program for it. And we only did that the first time. And since then, it has been a community effort where we have regularly scheduled Zoom calls to develop the program. And we also do a survey of you all virtual residents to see what topics you think we should be prioritizing each year. So essentially, what happens is we give you a list of topics plus a text box where you can add additional topics. It's usually not practical to add the additional topics the same year, but we can put them into the survey the following year. And you all tell us, and then we just take we calculate a single score, priority score for each session, and then we just take the top set of sessions to fill out all our time slots. It's as simple as that. Okay, so CI facilitators. In order to answer the question, what's a cyber infrastructure facilitator? Let's start with what's cyber infrastructure. And so there's a lot of terminology. Um, and cyber infrastructure is probably the most popular term at the National Science Foundation, but you'll also hear research computing or research computing and data. You'll hear high performance computing, which arguably is a subset of that, and on and on and on, right? There's lots and lots of terms for this. I think in Europe, it's often called e-science. Uh, Sometimes you hear like digital science or digital research, things like that. All of these terms, they may not be identical, but they are substantially overlapping. All right, so what is cyber infrastructure? Well, the answer is it depends who you ask. So if you ask a network engineer, cyber infrastructure is the network. By the way, now if you ask a cybersecurity person, they kind of have a very similar answer to that. Not identical, but similar. If you ask someone in the supercomputing world, the high performance computing HPC world, they're going to say that cyber infrastructure is supercomputers and the network. If you ask the cybersecurity folks, they're going to say it's the stuff that needs cybersecurity, which is not a helpful answer at all because that's approximately everything. And then anybody else, they're going to say, well, cyber infrastructure is supercomputers, the network, and the thing that I focus on. And none of these answers is particular and particular enough, but all of them are. Oh, okay, good. Never mind. All right. I was worried I might have forgotten to start the recording, but I did not. All right. So, what is a cyber infrastructure facilitator? Well, there was a longer term originally, Advanced Cyber Infrastructure Research and Education Facilitator, or ACI REF. That term was coined in around 2012 by Marone Livni of University of Wisconsin-Madison in the development of a grant proposal that I'll talk about in a little bit that had that as the title. So, what does a cyber infrastructure facilitator do? Their job is to work with users. So, this means primarily researchers, but to some extent educators, to help them improve their research and education productivity and aspirations through using cyber infrastructure, and especially advanced cyber infrastructure. Um, at most institutions, the cohort of cyber infrastructure facilitators is small. Depending on the research expenditure, the annual research expenditure at a particular institution, it could be, I mean, for a very high expenditure institution, if you've got an institution whose annual research expenditure is like $1 billion, there's probably a team of cyber infrastructure facilitators. If it's a few hundred million, there's probably one or a couple. So at my institution and our most recent federal fiscal year, our research expenditure, research and development expenditure was about $500 million. So we're top 150, but not top 100 on the US News rankings, to give you kind of a flavor of where we are. And we have 1.7 FTE of cyber infrastructure facilitators. So we're already arguably ahead of the curve for where we are. But if you are at a less research intensive institution, an R2 or a non-PhD granting institution, there's a reasonable probability that you have at most part of an FTE of cyber infrastructure facilitator. Almost every institution that has research, computing intensive and data intensive research going on is a less research intensive institution by definition, because there are thousands of less research intensive institutions and only hundreds of high research intensive institutions. Um, so it can be a part-time role, it can be a full-time role. Um, and it's typically people who either are or used to be faculty, postdocs, research staff like research scientists, research programmers, and IT professionals, and in particular, enterprise IT professionals. A very common thing that happens is a CIO will one day go, okay, okay, Janet, you are now in charge of research computing, including helping people use it. That's now your job. And of course, it could be students. A lot of institutions, a significant number of institutions have students either as their sole facilitator or as, um, let's say, part of their facilitation team. All right, a little bit of background information that will help you, and you will hear this terminology over and over during your career as a cyber infrastructure professional. The five facings, and this goes back to, I want to say probably about 2012 or 13 or thereabouts, at a workshop that a bunch of us were at, and several of us kind of ganged together and came up with sort of a first draft of this idea. And it grew out of the term system facing, which means like a sysadmin or a network engineer, someone whose role primarily focuses on the machines. Um, but then we realized that there were other kinds of, and by the way, facing here is an adjective. It's not a noun, right? It became a noun in how we use it, but it's really an adjective. System facing, one who focuses on the system. Researcher facing, one who focuses on researchers. So a research computing facilitator is an example of that. And now here at OU, we've started a project for AI consultants, would be another form of researcher facing cyber infrastructure professional. Data facing, like a research data librarian, someone whose primary role or a significant part of their role is focusing on research data. Software facing, so research software engineers, and strategy and policy facing. And that's kind of more my role now. I started in the researcher facing, the facilitator role. Even though when I started this job, I was nominally director of the supercomputing center, that was me and one sysadmin. So um, much of my role has evolved into strategy and policy facing. So if I want to oversimplify what I mean by that, I mean begging for money. It's obviously bigger than that, but that's a huge part of what I do for a living. Okay, what is a facilitator not? Or at least not necessarily. So, not necessarily a computer scientist. And in fact, in my experience, most CI facilitators come from disciplines other than computer science. Not necessarily a systems facing person. In fact, most of the cyber infrastructure facilitators that I've encountered have little or no system facing role. They're again, there are people who are both like sysadmin and facilitator, and that's quite common. But there's a huge fraction of facilitators who have little or no system facing duties. Not necessarily a researcher. So again, a lot of people, and apparently Andrew was one of them, apparently a lot of people um, come from a non-research background and have to learn call it the business of doing research without themselves having experience doing research. And this program is intended, among other things, to provide some guidance in that regard. And I encourage you to go back and look at some of the previous workshops we've done and the recordings that we've got, because I think they will be very helpful for understanding how to um, learn the business of research and the business of academia in particular, um, because that that's key to being able to provide the capability, but also to have credibility with researchers. I was sort of raised by the worst case of this. So basically, faculty only care about the opinions of faculty, and PhDs only care about the opinions of PhDs. My dad was very much this way. If you didn't have a PhD, he didn't care what you thought at all. I'm pretty sure it's why my mom got a PhD, which she did after she married my dad. So on the other hand, I said not necessarily a researcher. On the other hand, not necessarily an IT professional either. They may not have any background in computing except as a user of computing, of IT. And definitely not necessarily an enterprise IT professional. Some are, but by no means all. I'm not sure what the ratio is, but my guess is there are at least twice as many non-enterprise CI facilitators as enterprise CI facilitators, and maybe more than that. Okay, so what does a facilitator do? Um, so these are cyber infrastructure professionals who work directly with researchers, both STEM and non-STEM, scholars and creatives. So a little bit of terminology background. People in humanities generally object to having what they do referred to as research. They strongly prefer the term scholarship. Now, that's not universal, but that is certainly common among folks in the humanities, that they would prefer that what they do is referred to as scholarship, not research. People in the arts generally refer to what they do as creative activity. Um, and so, I'm using research as a catch-all term here, but when I say research, I really mean the combination of research, scholarship, and creative activity. But um, the CI facilitators work directly with the users, which again, I'm going to simplify and say researchers, to advance the computing intensive and data intensive aspects of their research. Again, meaning that in the larger sense. Okay, so what does that mean in practice? What are the sorts of things that cyber infrastructure facilitators do? Years ago, it's about 6 or 7 years ago now, we sort of had to write down, all right, what are the list of duties? And this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I think it does capture the basics. So, a CI facilitation, its purpose is to amplify research productivity, to make the researcher more productive using the following mechanisms: helping adapt the workflows that researchers are using to the cyber infrastructure machines, the hardware and software. So that might be supercomputers or clouds or storage, or it could even be someone's local PC. Heck, it could in principle be a handheld. Usually it's not, but in principle it can be. And teaching researchers how to use these systems. Bridging the gap between researchers and technology experts. So it's often the case, for example, that our facilitators are called on to have a discussion where on the one side of the table is the researchers, and on the other side of the table is the technologists, and the facilitators are there to help facilitate, to help make that conversation flow effectively. And we'll talk about some of what goes into that in the next session, the effective communication session. Okay, anticipating what cyber infrastructure needs researchers are going to have. So obviously, one of the recent examples is the rise of large language models. So one of the things that cyber infrastructure folks now are finding themselves having to do is learn enough about these large language models and about how to obtain access to them, about how to use them effectively, so that they can help researchers make good use of them. That's becoming more specialized. and is kind of starting to bleed out from facilitators to more specialized cyber infrastructure professionals. And as I said, we're starting a project here. We have a project here underway for AI consultants, which is kind of deeper into that sort of stuff. Helping STEM researchers who have limited coding experience to design software that is use case specific and to port it to advanced cyber infrastructure architectures, teaching cybersecurity and compliance for research. So, more and more institutions have not only an open research computing environment, but also a legally regulated research computing environment. And actually, go ahead and put in the chat at your institution, which is it? Do you have one environment, or do you have two different environments, one for open and one for legally regulated? And I'll continue on while you're doing that. But don't be shy. Go ahead and put that in the chat. One of each, two different ones. One, but only the open one. Two, multiple. Right. I think we're going to see more and more. At my institution, it's currently one, but we're gearing up to deploy the legally regulated environment. And you can see from the responses that we're actually behind compared to our peer institutions. But we're gearing up to do that. Hopefully, by the end of this calendar year, we will have that at least in beta testing mode. All right, what else do cyber infrastructure facilitators do? Develop strategies for specific use cases, teach data management. Now, we do this typically in consultation and collaboration with others like research data librarians. Provide local and national training opportunities. So, of course, there's software carpentry workshops. That's a good example. There are lots of other kinds of training. So, for example, Access provides training. Of course, there's virtual residency and related sorts of things. There's lots and lots of training out there, and you can't expect your users to know what's available. So you can be helpful to your users by alerting them to these opportunities, even if they're not being provided locally. And then, of course, you might be crafting your own local training. Helping researchers evaluate technology solutions. Often a researcher will come to you and say, I know the solution for this particular need. I know what needs to be done. So just help me implement this. And that is not necessarily going to be a big success because oftentimes they are unaware of the either other opportunities or of limitations in their proposed technology solution. And so a significant part of your job is evaluating that technology solution or constructing one that better fits their use case. Recruiting, you want to have new users, new use cases. So one of the things you can never do as a research computing organization is you can never rest on your laurels. You always have to be producing new capabilities. And there are two reasons for that. One is your users genuinely need those new capabilities. And the other is if you're really good at providing the same thing as always, you're invisible. And therefore, everybody assumes that what you do is easy and they don't need to pay you for it. Um, that's not a win for anybody. It's not a win for you, obviously, but it's also not a win for them because they end up with a much worse capability than what they need to be successful. Researcher advocate to central administration. You're there to stand up for the researchers and say, this is what the researchers need. And recently, I spent an entire year talking to institutional leaders. So, our administration, um, department chairs, PIs of some of our biggest consumers of research computing resources. Um, to walk them through the value of what we're doing and what's needed moving forward. Um, Preparing the cyber infrastructure portions of papers, posters, what have you, and helping compose cyber infrastructure text for grant proposals. Because as a general rule, you cannot expect the faculty, the principal investigators, to know what the local cyber infrastructure is at the level of detail that they need for a proposal. And their one of their jobs is to go get money, and one of your jobs is to help them go get money. All right, so what qualities do you need in order to be a facilitator? You kind of have to sit in the middle of a two-dimensional, uh, um, call it Cartesian coordinate system. And you can see sort of on the horizontal, we've got loves technology versus loves research. And we've got loves people versus loves things. Um, so the loves technology versus loves research. Um, so if you love technology and you love things, you become a systems engineer, like a sysadmin or a network engineer or what have you, right? If you love technology but you love people, then you become the service desk. If you love if you love research and you love things, you become a researcher. If you love research and you love people, you become an educator. If you love all four, not literally equally, but well balanced, let's say, then you are a good candidate to be a cyber infrastructure facilitator because on the horizontal axis, you will be working with both research and technology. And on the vertical axis, you will be working with both people and things. And if any of those make you unhappy, you're not going to be a good fit to be a CI facilitator. Okay, so who cares about facilitators? Well, researchers do. They love us. They think we're swell. Um, in my experience, and maybe you've observed the same thing, especially if you yourself are or have been faculty, faculty feel individually very powerless. And they view their institution's administration as having as its primary purpose squashing them, telling them no, impeding their progress, right? Oh, we have all these policies. I don't like these policies. They're very inconvenient to deal with. I have to do all this cybersecurity stuff. I have to fill out all this paperwork and blah, 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 right? Um, so you've got to help them and show them also that the administration is not their enemy, that the administration is their partner, because you are part of the administration. You are not a member of their research team. They are automatically suspicious of you, by the way. On the other hand, you show up and are helpful, and they're not accustomed to that. So that's a huge win that you show up and you're helpful on a regular basis. They feel very grateful, believe it or not. Okay, and then national leadership cares about this. This is something that's been going on now for, I don't know, I guess it's now 14 years, give or take, that we've really had the attention of the federal government in particular and the federal research funding agencies, that they are very strongly of the opinion that this kind of role is mission critical for research success. Okay. And I'm not going to quote these reports, but I'm trying to give you the feel for how this works. Okay. I stopped measuring this in 2019. And the reason I stopped measuring this in 2019 is that the numbers got so completely out of hand that I can't track it anymore. The labor cost of trying to keep track of this is so outrageous, I gave up. But you can see the trend between 2008, when the Campus Champions were founded, and 2019, which was the last year that I had the wherewithal to track the numbers myself, because the labor cost became unbelievably high. What I used to do through 2019, what I would do is I would get the member lists for the Campus Champions, the CARC People Network, or rather the CARC Researcher Facing Network, and um, the virtual residency, and then I would merge them and eliminate duplicates, and that would give me a head count. And you can see there was exponential growth in facilitators and in institutions. And after that, I just gave up. It's just too much work to try and reconcile those three data sets. Okay, some background on the virtual residency. So way back in the distant mists of 2013, based on groundwork that was done in 2012, there was a team of 13 institutions led by Clemson that submitted I think it was $33.5 million proposal to the National Science Foundation to hire multiple cyber infrastructure facilitators at each of the 13 institutions for 4 years, and to do a bunch of other work as well. Around advanced networking. And you can see this was the original group. And you can see, by the way, notice the ones that do have logos and the ones where it just says text. This is going to be important in a moment. And our piece of that proposal was a virtual residency on teaching how to be a cyber infrastructure facility. So this thing, plus a component about EPSCoR, for those of you who are familiar with EPSCoR. Um, and the idea was that we would lead the EPSCoR component of this project. Well, it didn't work out that way. The NSF said, okay, we will give you, I think it was 1/7 of the money, more or less, to do half as many institutions for half as many years and not do the networking part at all. So basically, half as many institutions, half as much time, half as much work per institution per year. So 6 institutions got funded and 7 institutions got dumped. Um, and that was fine. The PI was very nice. He called all of us to tell us that we were out, and I took it well. I didn't make a fuss. So then what happened was the NSF started the Campus Cyber Infrastructure Program. That actually started in 2012, so about the same time. Um, and at first it was mostly around networking hardware and networking research. So the second year of the Campus Cyber Infrastructure Program, also known as CC Star, um, we um, we at OU put together a proposal with several other institutions across Oklahoma to create one of these science DMZ networks. That was what the program was originally intended to fund. Um, and then in 2014, the NSF did something that they rarely do, which is they said, we will give you money for a non-researcher hire, a cyber infrastructure engineer, they called it, campus cyber infrastructure engineer. So this effectively meant network engineer for the campus science DMZ network. And we thought, okay, well, why don't we go ahead and put in a proposal for that? The difficulty was, yeah, we put in a proposal um, for doing that, but we for getting a person paid for a few years. But what we really needed was we needed a hook because we knew everybody and their dog was going to be putting in a proposal like that, right? How often does the NSF offer to pay for non-researcher personnel? Not very often. And so um, we proposed by talking about hiring a cyber infrastructure engineer, but that was actually going to be a cyber infrastructure facilitator as well, and leveraged the ACI REF grant that Clemson had already gotten funded that we had gotten kicked off of. So we put their PI on our advisory committee, and we closely tied ourselves to this thing that was already successful, right? It was like 5.3 million or something, right? Our thing was 400K, but their thing was like 5.3 million. So we were the only institution that was former ACI ref, although we'd gotten kicked out in phase one, as the original proposal was called, an EPSCoR jurisdiction, and we were going to lead the EPSCoR thrust within the ACIRF project. And we were already a campus cyber infrastructure equipment awardee. We got the network equipment grant. So we could already prove we needed a campus CI engineer. And so we were able to successfully propose because we had a differentiator. Again, everybody and their dog was submitting this proposal. We had a differentiator, and we really wanted to have as much differentiator as possible. And so we said, we will create a national workforce development program for cyber infrastructure facilitators and campus cyber infrastructure engineers, because this was a campus cyber infrastructure engineer proposal. And as they say in Texas, you got to dance with the one what brang you. So we've been brang by the campus CI engineers. We thought we would incorporate that. So a workshop for both facilitators and network engineers. Um, so that got funded, and we got stellar reviews. It was great. Really loved that. But one of the things they said was, we love the idea of the virtual residency, but only if it applies not just to the 6 institutions in the ACI REF grant that Clemson is leading, but all institutions. Well, you can see from the track record, we've been above 90% on both individuals and institutions for the entire time. including up through last year. I obviously don't have numbers for this year, and we would be, right? I'll get to some numbers about that. All right, so now why can't we just do the enterprise way, right? Why don't we just do this in an enterprisey way? Well, because the way enterprise IT trains doesn't align with what we do. So in enterprise IT, there's literally millions of enterprise IT professionals, right? So in 1970, it was about 500,000, and it was about 0.5% of the US civilian workforce. By 2014, it was 4.5 million and about 3% of the US civilian workforce. So that was a growth rate of doubling every 13 years. It may have gone faster since then. I'm not sure. This is the only publication I was able to find that fit this. So there are degree programs. Basically, just about every college and university in the country has some kind of IT or computer science or similar degree programs, certifications, both formal, let's say matriculated and non-matriculated. Huge resources devoting to updating skills, right? You go get your Red Hat certified engineer, for example, and I think it's every 5 years or something. You have to redo it or it doesn't count anymore. And so you have to go through the training again, blah, blah, blah. This doesn't even take into account that there are data science degree programs now all over the country. Research computing, by contrast, is thousands of professionals, not millions. So, three orders of magnitude difference. Maybe at some point it will only be two orders of magnitude. But at the moment, it's three orders of magnitude difference. So, you're not going to have degree programs. No institution is going to start a degree program knowing that their research computing degree is only going to have uptake equivalent to 0.1% as much as their computer science degree. No one's going to agree to that, right? That's like one person per year. There's no certifications, there's minimal resources for updating your skills. And so informal education is the way to go. All right, so let's talk about the virtual residency. So, what is the virtual residency? We teach pre-service and in-service facilitators how to do or how to do better facilitation. But we also have a hidden secret agenda that I'll get to. All right, how do we do this? We do our annual summer workshop like this. We've been doing this is number 12. We've been doing this since 2015. We have workshop planning calls every month. And of course, as we got closer to today, that frequency increased. We try to hold a meeting at the FC conference every year. And then we've run some apprenticeships, a grant proposal writing apprenticeship. We put that on hiatus after we got a grant, paper writing apprenticeship, and now we have a grant running apprenticeship. And here's the thing, before we created the virtual residency, no one had ever tried to do this. And so I love informal education for two reasons. One, it works, and two, it's a lot less labor. And I am lazy. And so I like ways that involve me doing less. Now, not none by any means. I spent my entire weekend prepping for this week, but and lots of time before that. It takes many hours of labor to put this together. But having said that, it's a lot less than trying to teach courses. Okay. So why do we do this? Well, facilitators typically have strong experience within their own discipline, which again usually is not computer science, but very limited experience with other disciplines. Most of them, most CI professionals and facilitators in particular, have never been faculty, so they don't necessarily know how faculty think. They may have little or no research experience in some cases, especially if they are enterprise IT folks. Even if they do have a strong research background, typically that background is in their own discipline. They don't have experience with research outside their own discipline. When we started this program 12 years ago, or I guess 11 years ago, there weren't any programs locally, regionally, nationally to teach people how to do this. And, when I started my career, when I started as a nominally supercomputing center director, where the definition of supercomputing center in that case was me and a sysadmin, which, by the way, is still a common definition at many institutions. Um, Nobody knew what it was. Nobody knew what my job was supposed to be. They just were glad I'd show up and help them. And so I had time. I had 5 years to figure out what my job was. Now, if you get hired into one of these roles, you have 5 minutes. And so the tolerance for not knowing what you're doing yet is basically zero. All right, so who has this served? Over 2,000 people from over 560 institutions, every U.S. state, 4 U.S. territories, that is D.C., Puerto Rico, Guam, and U.S. Virgin Islands. 20 other countries on every continent except Antarctica. And honestly, I despair of Antarctica. I don't think we're ever going to get any uptake there. A lot of variety to the types of institutions. Um, it, we serve a huge number of people from a broad variety of institutions. We're very, very proud of that. Okay, so who's here? Well, we don't know. We can only tell you who pre-registered. So we have 244 pre-registrants. That's actually already out of date because I had several more in the meantime. There's probably a bunch coming in right now that I'm not going to be able to deal with until the break. Um, lots and lots of institutions. We don't know how many people will actually show up. We always have people show up who didn't register. We always have people who registered but didn't show up. So there's no way to predict. Okay, so why is it hard to help researchers do research computing or use research computing in their research? Well, there's really sort of four issues, but they're kind of on two dimensions. So one of the issues is applicability. So more and more disciplines are doing computer and data intensive research. Um, so, when I started my career in the 1980s as a grad student, um, it was pretty much physical sciences and engineering. You'd occasionally run into a bioscientist, but that was rare. Over time, biosciences, life sciences, got added in. We also started to see uptake by social sciences. Computer science was very standoffish for a very long time, and it's only in about the last 5 or 6 years with the explosion of AI, especially large language models, that we're seeing a lot of interest from computer science faculty in a way that was never true historically. And then now we see humanities and arts and business and sports and so on. Ubiquity within any individual discipline, a higher and higher fraction of researchers want to use research computing. Okay. Um, System complexity. So the machines get harder and harder to use. And there's a very simple reason for this because we're willing to tolerate it. You see, there's a tension between, on the one hand, performance, computing going faster, and convenience, usability. Um, the faster your computing goes, the less usable, the less convenient it is to use, the more of a pain it is to learn how to do it. Um, and in the context of research computing, the vendors have learned that they can make it hard to use and we'll just suck it up and learn how to use it and then teach the researchers. We as the facilitators will learn how to do that and then teach the researchers. So the storage hierarchy is getting deeper all the time. So, it used to be that you had the registers of the CPU, you had the cache of the CPU, you had RAM, and you had hard disk, and maybe you had a tape archive somewhere. Now you have all of those, but you also have multiple levels of SSDs. You may have multiple levels of memory, so high bandwidth memory, for example. And you've got that sort of weird in between thing. Uh, I don't even know what they call it anymore, CXL or something, where it's technically SSD, but it's very fast, super fast SSD that can pretend to be very slow RAM if you want it to. Um, so there's more and more levels to the storage hierarchy, and then parallelism is getting more and more hybrid all the time as well. The big thing here is accelerators, especially GPU cards. And then the conceptual distance. So there's a mental gap between what people think computing is, and I'll show you what people think computing is. This is what people think computing is. It's a handheld, right? Phone, tablet. That's people's mental model. When I started in this business, their mental model was a desktop PC. And even the gap between a handheld and a desktop PC is pretty significant. But in research computing, a lot of what happens is command line, Linux, batch, remote, shared. And all of those are the exact opposite of what most normal human beings think computing is, which is a handheld, right? A phone, really. Um, so we have to take them through all of this gap, but their tolerance over the years has not changed. Their tolerance for how long they're willing to put into learning how to use research computing resources, that tolerance is 1 hour. And if it takes longer than 1 hour to learn, they lose interest. They're gone. So we have to figure out how to make them productive the first time in a single hour. That's not necessarily straightforward to do. Okay, more and more institutions have on-campus cyber infrastructure. So by my own count, almost 90% of R1s, more than a third of R2s, and on the U.S. News, excuse me, top uh, national universities, even three-quarters of the top 200 institutions and just about all of the top 50 institutions have on-campus research computing. And most have their own virtual residents, and therefore we can predict their own cyber infrastructure facilitators. So this is now normal. It didn't used to be, but it is now. So um, we can't say that it's universal, but it's quite common. Not having on campus research computing resources, not having your own local cyber infrastructure facilitator is unusual. It used to be common, it used to be normal. Now it is abnormal. Okay, does this work? Well, we did an evaluation in 2020, and we're going to be doing one again this year. And that evaluation showed that and by the way, I'll give a little background in a moment, but I will talk about that evaluation in more detail. But basically, the evaluation showed that we're doing a terrific job, and it's very effective, and people think it is. Um, the virtual residency is also part of a larger effort that has multiple levels to it. Two of them are within the virtual residency, and you saw them in the title of the workshop, introductory and intermediate. Introductory meaning the foundational skills that you need as a pre-service or early in-service research computing facilitator, cyber infrastructure facilitator. And we've been doing that consistently for years, teaching those levels. The intermediate level, same thing, but these are skills for experienced cyber infrastructure facilitators. Then there's the becoming an institution level cyber infrastructure leader. We used to call this the virtual residency advanced level, but we realized that the audience for this is not just facilitators. It's really any cyber infrastructure professional might want to become a cyber infrastructure leader. So that might include a system facing person, a data facing person, a software facing person. Strategy and policy facing, they probably already are, and cyber infrastructure leader. So these are foundational cyber infrastructure leadership skills to help a cyber infrastructure professional transition to becoming a cyber infrastructure leader. And so we just last year started teaching that as a standalone workshop as a way to benefit the folks who are coming from other facings other than researcher facing. And then the Cyber Infrastructure Leadership Academy, which was originally intended exclusively to help institution level cyber infrastructure leaders become national cyber infrastructure leaders because the national cyber infrastructure leaders keep retiring on us. Um, and so we did that for 4 workshops, and then the feedback we got from the participants, from the cyber infrastructure leaders, was we should also have a workshop on how to be a better institution level cyber infrastructure leader. So we did that for the first time in spring of 25. Excuse me, and that was very well received. Okay, and then this is a partial list of organizations focused on cyber infrastructure professionals. And we would encourage you to join as many of these as align with your responsibilities, your role at your institution. All right, so this year's workshop, I'm not going to walk through each and every one of the sessions because you're going to be experiencing them as we go. But you can see we have a very good program lined up for you. We're doing 4 sessions a day, except Friday is only a half day because it's Friday, and I don't think anybody will show up Friday afternoon. Come on, we know better. You can get a copy of the agenda on our webpage, the workshop webpage. We have 74 presenters from 58 institutions. I'm not going to dig into every one of these. I'm not going to read these out loud. But lots of presenters from lots of institutions. How did we pick them? I mentioned this earlier. Um, Years ago, we asked, what do you not like? And one of the big answers we got repeatedly was, we keep hearing from the same people over and over. Like we heard from somebody 3, 4 times in the same week. We want more variety of perspectives. So we turned that into a begging and pleading approach. So what we do is we beg and plead by email. Please, 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 oh please, oh please, come be on a panel, be a panelist, be a moderator. We have a few talks that we also look for speakers for. And this year, I will tell you, by the time I sat down and went through the list, I used every single person on that list. Every volunteer was given a role, and it was a nightmare. It took an entire weekend just to work it out so that every role got filled. It was really, really hard to do that. Because some people say, oh, I can be a panelist, but only for this one panel. That's the only place I have expertise. And then other people say, oh, I can do, 8 of the different panels, and here's the list. And you have to be really careful how you assign people to panels in order to make that work. And then we have some people who just say, I can only be a moderator, which is great, but then we have to pick those folks. All right, so what are we here to accomplish? Um, we want to learn how to work with researchers who are using cyber infrastructure, and that includes how to find them as well as how to help them. Learn how to be cyber infrastructure leaders. That's part of our hidden secret agenda. Start thinking about becoming national cyber infrastructure leaders. It may be the beginning of your career, but don't be thinking about just this job. Think about the arc of your career and where you would like to go. One of the things that the how to get a job experts always say is always dress for the job you want, not the job you have. Um, Here we're not talking about dressing for that job. I'm just wearing a polo shirt. Here we're talking about thinking about the longer term aspirations that you have for your career. So, what aren't we trying to do? We aren't trying to teach technical content. There's a little bit of that, but not very much. Most of what we're going to do is focused on the people side, the profession of cyber infrastructure facilitation and cyber infrastructure leadership, thinking longer term. The reason we don't teach technical content is lots of other people teach technical content and do it extremely well. And you know what? There's only so many sessions. We're doing a total of 18 sessions, including this one. And there just isn't time to cover everything we'd want to do on the professional side, let alone everything we'd want to do on the technical side. So we try and de-emphasize the technical content. Our hidden secret agenda is to prepare a bigger workforce where there's greater need for this capability. Fewer people know how to do it, and there isn't a mechanism to prepare a large enough cohort. Um, so some of you already know how to do this stuff, but it took you a long time to learn it on your own. If we want to keep up with demand, then we've got to be training more efficiently. And the hidden secret part is you are the cyber infrastructure leaders of tomorrow. And I mean that in a very literal sense. Cyber infrastructure facilitators at a particular institution, collectively, the group of cyber infrastructure facilitators at an institution, and at some institutions that's part of an FTE, and at some institutions it's several FTEs, and anywhere in between. But you as facilitators have a better sense of at least an important component of your institution's research portfolio than anybody at your institution except the folks in the VP for Research office. They may know better than you. They don't know deeper than you, but they may know broader than you because they'll know the stuff that is not computing and data intensive, which, by the way, is a smaller and smaller fraction as time goes on. All right. Now we're also running a program called the Certified Cyber Infrastructure Facilitator Training and Development Program. This was funded by the NSF through a cyber training grant. My co-PIs are Dana Brunson and Dirk Colbury, and I believe Dirk is on right now. or at least I saw him earlier. So what do we mean? And this is a professional development certification. What does that mean? This is not a matriculated certificate like you would get at a university. This is more like CISSP or Red Hat certified engineers, all like that. Okay, so what is this? By the way, we are the number one sifted link when you Google us. It used to be the Canadian Center for International Fisheries Training and Development, but we knocked them off their perch. So we are a first of a kind, non-matriculated certification of professional development. So this is again informal education, and it's not a participation certificate. You have to take exams. So you earn badges, and then those badges add up to the certification. Why aren't we doing a matriculated program? Well, the answer is because we can't get people to sign up, enough people to sign up for that. If there are, let's say, 2,000 of you, which is my back of the envelope guesstimate of how many cyber infrastructure facilitators the non-commercial sectors of the US economy can handle. If we are 2,000-ish people, excuse me, there is no way that there's enough of us in a degree program to sustain that degree program. And I'll tell you an unhappy story. And this is years ago now. It's probably 15, 20 years ago. The NSF actually paid for a program to develop a an associate's degree program in HPC sysadmin, 2-year program. And Texas State Technical College implemented that 2-year program, and they ran it for a few years as an associate's degree program, and nobody signed up. Not literally nobody, but not enough to sustain the program. And the problem was it was listed as HPC sysadmin or high performance computing system administrator. And who the heck knows what HPC is, right? So that didn't attract anyone. So they switched it to cloud, and people know what cloud is, but that didn't attract enough people. So it's really hard to sustain degree programs, and that's at one institution, right? It's just not sustainable. All right, what are the objectives of Sifted? Provide both training and proof of mastery of the skills that are mission critical to facilitation and cultivate and expand the community. That's from the perspective of the facilitators themselves. From the perspective of the cyber infrastructure organizations, the HPC centers and stuff, increase uptake of facilitation, leading to uptake of cyber infrastructure. And from the perspective of the researchers, increase the researchers' research productivity because now you have access to expertise. Okay, so method, figure out what the skills are that are needed for facilitation, develop for each of those skills a training mechanism, an exam, and a scoring rubric, and then pilot test that. Um, Construct the collections of badges that constitute certification, test the badging methods, and we're currently in beta test mode now, and evaluate the success of that program. So the challenges that we're dealing with, what skills do the facilitators need? How do they build credibility with the researchers and with their institutions? How do we train enough of them? How do we know that it's working, and how do we sustain it beyond the short term? So this week you have an opportunity to earn an intake interview practicum badge. That's on Wednesday. And we have, I think, about 14 or 15 judges available to decide who gets the badges during the intake interview practicum, which is the second session on Wednesday. So many of you will earn the badge. Not everyone will earn it. Usually it runs about 2 or 3 to 1 in terms of yes versus no. But many of you will earn the badge, and it doesn't cost you anything. It's free. Okay, so you are next. Why would you want to be a cyber infrastructure leader? You've heard me pounding on that, and I'm very serious about that. We need cyber infrastructure leaders. I don't do anything unless I have both good, virtuous, warm-hearted reasons and wicked, selfish, base, mercenary reasons. If I don't have both of those, if I don't have the good, warm-hearted reason for doing a thing, I can't look myself in the mirror. But if I don't have the wicked, selfish reason, I'm not motivated to get off my duff and do anything about it. So let's break that down. What are the good reasons, the warm-hearted reasons to become a cyber infrastructure leader? Well, you have good ideas. They're based on your experience, they're based on your observation. And if, by the way, if you're pre-service, you will have good ideas. Trust me, You will have excellent ideas about how to do things effectively. And you love helping researchers use computing to make their research better because that's the position you chose, right? You would never have agreed to do this job if not for that. And you know that your administration, they don't understand research computing. They need your help to understand it. And you're really good at explaining things because you're a facilitator and that's what you do for a living, right? Now, the wicked, selfish, mercenary base reasons, it pays better to be a leader. Um, at every organization, there are plenty of people who are willing to do the absolute minimum. Um, the way I like to jokingly refer to that is never let it be said that I wouldn't do the very least I could do. Um, there's plenty of people who are not willing to take on responsibility and ownership for leading their institution's cyber infrastructure. Plenty of people like that. There are only a few who are willing to take that on. As a result, it pays better and it has better job security because almost nobody at your institution is willing to do this. When I started, what happened was I was summoned into the office of the then CIO. This is 20 some years ago now, about exactly 20 years ago. And he asked me, Henry, what's your ideal job? And I said, well, 25 to 50% teaching, 25 to 50% doing my own research, 25 to 50% helping other people with their research. And he said, okay. And he offered me a giant raise over what I was making as a research programmer. Um, and of course, I ended up saying yes, right? I hadn't intended to be a cyber infrastructure leader. I thought, oh, I'll lead the education part of the supercomputing center that we're in the process of creating. No, there wasn't budget for three people. There was budget for two people. Um, and the other person had to be systems facing. There was no choice on that. So I ended up having to become the leader. And I didn't know what that meant. I had no idea what I was doing. Again, I had the luxury of time to figure it out, but you won't. Um, and so um, it became clear to me because this mattered. It mattered to me that we do a good job, that putting it in somebody else's hands was going to drive me up a wall. And doing it myself, making the decisions myself, that was going to make me happy. Okay, so why be a national cyber infrastructure leader? Well, the good, warm-hearted, virtuous reasons. The national community really needs your insights. You know things, and you need to share them with the national community. But you also get an opportunity to shape the national research computing ecosystem. And that means that, again, you can apply what you know to make it better. And the wicked, selfish reason is when the other national leaders notice you, that's really good for your career. Okay, so again, these are the groups that you can join. There's a whole lot of them. They break out more or less by the facings, right? In some cases, they cover all the facings. Like the Campus Research Computing Consortium, or CARC, is all of the facings. Campus Champions is largely researcher facing. Carpentries is mostly researcher facing. CASC is strategy and policy facing. It's leadership. Cyber ambassadors is for facilitators largely, so it's researcher facing, and so on, right? And so um, pick the ones that align with not just the role that you currently have, but the role that you'd like to have, because maybe over time you'd like that role to evolve. Get involved with the organizations. And again, this is not an exhaustive list of all those organizations, but it is a pretty good starting point. Okay, here's a question. Do you have imposter syndrome? How many of you feel like you don't really deserve to be here? You're not smart enough, you're not useful enough, you don't know enough to really be included. And go ahead and put it in the chat, either yes or no, to the question, do you have imposter syndrome? Do you suffer from imposter syndrome? Go ahead and put that in the chat, yes or no. I saw one no, two. So out of all the responses, I've seen three no's so far. Okay. It's normal to have imposter syndrome, to feel like you don't really belong here. You don't have the skills that are needed to be productive. That's normal. It's okay. But here's the thing. An expert is not someone who knows everything. An expert is someone who is 5 minutes ahead of everybody else. Years ago, when I was just out of grad school myself, I was a postdoc, and a grad student came to me for career advice. And I thought, how am I going to give this kid career advice when I don't know anything myself? But here was the thing. So, yeah, I didn't know anything myself, but they knew less than me. So I knew just above zero, but they knew zero. And so I gave them some feedback, and I guess it proved to be useful for them. Yeah. So don't have imposter syndrome. Remember that you know more than them. You don't have to know everything. You do have to know how to find out. And that's why we have these communities, right? Joining these communities, you can ask people questions. Well, what about XYZ? And get useful information. So, and to give you a very concrete example just from the past year, so in November, on the I think it was either the Campus Champions or the CARC People Network mailing list, one of them, there was a conversation about legally regulated enclaves, right? HIPAA, controlled unclassified information, that kind of stuff. And again, we here at OU do not yet have one, but we're gearing up now. Mentioned in that discussion was a software product that did a lot of the heavy lifting, that does a lot of the heavy lifting. And so I immediately started exploring that software product, and um, we now have a very clear idea of how to use it. And we've done pretty much all the legwork to get ourselves ready to deploy. We're still finalizing our system security plan, but that's going well. And all of that came out of just being on one of these mailing lists. And a conversation happened to occur. I didn't ask about this. I didn't know there was such a thing. Conversation happened to occur, and it led me down a path that I think is going to be really successful. All right, here's how you can make your mark in at the national level. There's two ways you can do it. And I'll give you examples from my own career. One is invent good things, and the second is make good things better, right? So on inventing good things, I invented a workshop series. Most recently, we did it in 2018, so it's been a while, but it's called Supercomputing in Plain English. You can look it up on our website. The videos are still out there. I had a lot more hair back then. The One Oklahoma Cyber Infrastructure Initiative, or One Okie, which included the One Oklahoma Optical Initiative, which was sort of the initial. It wasn't yet a Science DMZ. That was the One Oklahoma Friction Free Network, but it was the first step in that direction. We created a new business model for our tape archive. And then I founded the virtual residency, the Becoming an Institution Level CI Leader, and the Cyber Infrastructure Leadership Academy, and of course, Sifted. I with collaboration from many others, came up with these ideas and put them to work. But then you can also make good things better. So, the National Computational Science Institute used to run a lot of parallel computing workshops, and I contributed to those. I ran the SC Education program one year at the SC Supercomputing Conference. Dana Brunson and I co-led the Exceed Campus Engagement Program, which the biggest piece of that was the Campus Champions. So I've been able to contribute to these national efforts. Now, here's the thing. So, the Coalition for Academic Scientific Computation, think of this as the de facto professional society for cyber infrastructure organization leaders. Um, and it's primarily R1s, but also some national labs and things like that. When we joined CASC, and that was way back in 2004, there were 35 member institutions. Now there's over 100. So it's more than tripled in institution count since I joined. There's still a lot of room. There's plenty of additional space for more growth, but um, there's lots of institutions involved in research computing, and CASC has been a great way to find out what's going on at the national level. Among other things, to figure out where the money river is flowing and finding a dipper to dip some of that money out of. And here's the thing, you might as well accept that you're going to be in charge. You will be dragged kicking and screaming upstairs. Doesn't matter whether you want to or not. It's going to happen. The baby boomers are retiring at an astonishing rate. Every day, 10,000 baby boomers retire, right? Well, okay, reach age 65. Some people are putting off retirement, but are reaching retirement age every single day. And my generation, Gen X, I am the eldest year, 1965. I am the oldest possible Gen Xer, or near enough to, or within 9 months of the oldest possible Gen Xer. Um, and, at some point I'm going to retire, right? I'm not planning on it anytime soon, but, it's inevitable. You got two choices. You can retire or you can die. There's no middle ground on this. Um, so somebody's got to take up the mantle. And guess who it's going to be? It's going to be you. By the time you're 35, you end up in management anyway, whether you wanted to or not. And the reason you end up in management is by the time you're 35, you're the only person that's been around long enough to know how the joint is run. So you gotta, right? But here's the good news. This really is the best job ever. Every single day, I get to see the value of the work I'm doing reflected in the fact that the researchers say, oh, that's working. Now I'm being productive, right? Every single day. It is the best job ever. Now, by the way, it's mostly our facilitators who are making that happen, and our sysadmins, and now our AI consultants. But they're taking researchers from I'm stuck and panicking to I'm productive and happy every single day. Okay. Here's a bibliography if you've got if you want to read up on some of this stuff, what we've been doing. And here are the various grants that have supported this work over the years. And I'm happy to take questions, although we are largely at the end of our time. But if there's a few questions, I can take a few. I'm sure you guys will forgive me.
Yeah, I have a couple questions.
Please.
So you mentioned pretty early on, this is awesome, by the way. Thank you for doing this. You mentioned early on something about that I think we can all resonate with is like if you're really good at what you do, then people don't really get that or appreciate that
Great.
fully and can maybe get rid of your position.
Yep.
And then they have worse capability than before. So I've had that experience personally, and so my first part of my question is, I'd like to hear more about how you can advocate for yourself and your position, especially when you are good. And then the second part of my question is, in making your mark, how do you prevent burnout, which can come from taking on too much?
Yeah. And I'm gonna start with the first part of your question, and I'll give you two things that have worked really well for me. And I'm not gonna claim they're gonna work great for everyone, but they've worked really well for me. The first thing is shameless self-promotion. I'm constantly telling people how awesome I am. I try not to make it sound like it's just a giant ego thing, but I'm always giving both the users and the administration clear feedback on things that I'm doing, and this is really important, social proof of the value that I add. So, for example, I fairly frequently get invited to be on an external advisory committee for somebody's grant proposal. And I will send that to my boss, with a little thing at the top, no action needed, information only. I'm doing this, right? This will be 4 hours a year, so it's not a big deal, but I've been invited to do this. Or whatever it may be, that I'm getting feedback from the community that the work I'm doing is valuable, right? I make sure that goes up the chain of command. In fact, years ago, when we were on our first CIO back in the early 2000s, I was regularly sending those kinds of things to my boss, and he was sending them to his boss, the president. And finally, I got this beautiful letter on physical letterhead from the president, signed by the president, or at least by his auto pen, that in a very sweet and loving way, said, "Please stop sending us these," which was the best possible message. We get it. You're awesome. Leave us alone. Um, so I think that's a very important component of it. Make sure that people know you're awesome, not just your opinion of it, but when you get feedback from others that you're awesome, make sure that goes to the right people so that they see that you're awesome. The second thing is there must always be new capabilities. As I said earlier, just doing the same thing that you've always done, but doing it better and better, that is not enough for two reasons. One is the practical reason, which is that your researchers always need new capabilities. So, we're doing the legally regulated enclave. That is something that 20 years ago our researchers didn't need, but now they do, right? Um, but on the other hand, in addition to your researchers always needing new capabilities, you need to be showing value add. And again, doing the same thing well no longer looks like value add. It looks like it's easy and it's magic and it doesn't take much, and they don't need you. Um, and if it looks easy and magic and they don't need you, you're out. You're a cost, not an investment. So it can't ever look like it's easy. It has to look like you're always producing new and exciting and valuable capabilities. And the institution, both your researchers and your administration, have to be aware that you're always adding more value to the institution. That's very, very important. And I've already forgotten the second part of your question.
Yeah, so it's actually directly to that point. So when you're always adding new capabilities or doing more things, taking on new things, like how do you prevent burnout? How do you protect
Yeah, and I'm
yourself?
probably the wrong person to ask because I'm not good at work-life balance, although I've been trying to get better at it with, let's say, mixed success. My general approach is I will always have too many responsibilities. I will always be juggling too many balls. And so if there's a ball that nobody is screaming at me about, I'll drop it, right? If nobody is telling me something is important, it's not important. Because if it was important, they'd be telling me. You may have noticed faculty are not shy about sharing their opinion with you, um, or anyone really. And so my approach is I always carefully monitor what is it that people are fussing about and what are they not fussing about. And if we're doing something that nobody is making a fuss about, we stop. It's not worth it.
Thank you. I'm always juggling too many balls myself, but
I understand. And
yeah,
remember, you never have more than half the resources you need to accomplish what you're supposed to accomplish. And if they give you more resources, that does not mean you have a higher fraction of the resources you need. It means they expect more outcome from you. You'll always be at no more than 50% of the resources you need. Okay, any other questions? Okay, thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording, but we are coming back in a little under 25 minutes for our next session, Effective Communication, which I'll also be presenting. And so I'm going to leave the session running and just stay logged in, and we'll be back in a little bit. Thank you, everybody.